Welcome to the Interconnected Systems Framework ISF 101 and Introduction. It's October 22nd. We're really excited to collaborate with the Northwest Mental Health Technology Transfer Center and ourselves at the Pacific Southwest Mental Health Technology Transfer Center. We're calling this the ISF West Coast Party, so that we have come together in unity here to do some deep learning and conversation around what is the Interconnected Systems Framework for those of us who are entering the conversation, and through the webinar series, number 2 and number 3, one is in December and one is in January, deepening our practice and really thinking about where the next directions of this work are going to carry us and where we will carry the work. So I'm going to move ahead. I do want to note that we are funded by SAMHSA, and this webinar is not necessarily reflective of SAMHSA. They're deeply supported by SAMHSA. So you heard me say earlier that we are a combined West Coast ISF party today. So I just want to do a zoom in for those of you who are new to the Pacific Southwest and Northwest Mental Health Technology Transfer Centers. So I'm going to do my introduction first and then pass it north in literally and in webcam land to my colleague Kelcey Schmitz. So my name is Leora Wolf-Prusan. I'm the School Mental Health Lead for the Pacific Southwest Mental Health Technology Transfer Center. As you can see in our amazing zoom in of our region, we serve parts of the Pacific Islands, Hawaii, California, Nevada, and Arizona. And I want to just bump it up to Kelcey to say hi and introduce where her region serves.
All right, thanks. Hi, I'm Kelcey Schmitz, and I'm the School Mental Health Lead for the Northwest Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, and I'm located at the University of Washington SMART Center, the School Mental Health Assessment Research and Training Center. And our region includes Alaska, Idaho, Washington, and Oregon.
So we are all together in conversation this afternoon. If you are new to the Mental Health Technology Transfer Center models, we are actually entering our second year. We launched last fall a new concept from the Substance Abuse Mental Health Administration, and we are really tasked with supporting not only the mental health workforce development, but also specifically the school mental health workforce development in our region. So we provide trainings and technical assistance and resources to you to really think about what your needs are and how we can really amp up our muscles and our skill sets to meet the needs of the young people that we serve in the school systems that they are learning and growing in. I want to just point out that we've got a ton of ways that that happens, both in each one of our centers and also together as a national collective. As you can see, you are on a webinar, so we often provide no-cost webinars. You can subscribe to each one of our center's newsletters. There's a lot of amazing resources that come from our newsletters. We also provide regional trainings and individual consultation and coaching and a whole bunch of other ways to access our TA, which we're going to talk about at the end of our webinar. So I'm going to move us ahead. So I want to say before we kind of dive into Susan Barrett that one of the reasons that we're coming together today, and I mentioned this a little bit off top, is that we are really coming together to both deepen our understanding of the Interconnected Systems Framework and also think about ways in which we can grow the framework to meet the needs of our local needs and contexts. And we're really, really grateful that Susan Barrett, who's one of the original authors of the monograph manuscript, you'll be hearing more about it in a little bit, that Susan said yes to not only saying this is where the work has come and has gone, but also this is where we're thinking the work may go as we move ahead. So as I transition and introduce Susan, I just really want to lift up that if you have a connection of something that Susan is bringing in theory, if you have a connection, a practical connection, please link it in our chat box. Please show us your websites, your products, your ideas. And this is really a chance for us to grow our community practice around Interconnected Systems Framework. But again, I want to welcome Susan as right now serving as the director for the Center for Social Behavior Support Center at Old Dominion University, and she's also an implementation partner with the U.S. National TA Center on Positive Behavioral Interventions and Support. She is a giant in the field, and we're really grateful to be listening and learning with her as we move forward thinking about the Interconnected Systems Framework. Before we pass it on to Susan, there she is. Hi, Susan. Susan may not stay on webcam the whole time, but I just wanted to say hi. I wanted to point out that in your session handouts, that part of this webinar series is a build off of the 3 fact sheets that Susan and her team, in partnership with our center, that we released this last month. So in your handouts, you should find the 101 fact sheet. You can also go onto our website to find 201 and 301, which we'll talk about later. But this is a webinar to do deeper exploration of the fact sheet that you've got in your handout toolkit. So I'm going to pass it off to Susan. You'll hear my voice when we close. And I just want to say thank you so much for this conversation, Susan.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. It's fantastic to see about 55 people from all over the country, and it looks like we even have some friends from Australia on the line too. So really excited that there is so much interest in this work. So as Leora was explaining, we have just launched 3 fact sheets that go along with our second monograph that we just published. And today we want to take a little deeper dive into establishing some common knowledge around what ISF is. I apologize that we've introduced a new acronym to your life, but we really want to coalesce the lessons learned from the multi-tiered system of support and the work we've been doing in positive behavioral interventions and supports, and really coalesce our school mental health around those lessons. So we termed this new acronym Interconnected System Framework, and we're going to go and take a little bit of a deep dive into that. I want to set us up with a little bit of context and language and key messages around what's unique about ISF, and then we will go into describing some of the steps for getting started. So to be really specific about the objectives for this afternoon, everything is really built on a teaming structure in ISF, so we're going to learn a little bit about how to establish that. I want folks to ask questions in the chat. We really want to hear from you, but it's really critical for us to make sure that you're really clear on what this is and debunk maybe some of the myths out there about some of the implementation efforts that are going on. We also want to define the process for evaluating some specific practices inside schools, and then we will cover a little bit of discussing some of the implementation challenges or solutions and innovations, because right now across the country we've got knowledge development sites that are putting together district level teams, we've got school level teams, and we're really learning a lot from our knowledge development sites, and we're hoping to learn from everybody on this call as we collect different stories in the field and really kind of bring together a professional learning community that we can pass on the best type of information to one another. So let's get started. Let's start to define the ISF. So this is really unique because I think that a lot of folks are trying really hard to pull a lot of different initiatives together. And ISF is really about that deliberate application of using the multi-tiered system of support framework to really bring in all of the social, emotional, and behavioral interventions under that one umbrella. And so it's really about walking folks through a step-by-step process to be able to design one coherent system and deliberately start to integrate the activities that are going on under that umbrella. And so we're talking about alignment, we're talking about integration, we're talking about making sure that it's a single system and that there's symmetry of process occurring at the state and regional level, district, community level, and school level. And we're going to talk about kind of threading that needle across the cascade and making sure that there's a symmetry of implementation processes and procedures that we kind of stay close to, because it's really important that we adopt a way of work, even when we are customizing this to fit the unique needs of each of our settings that we're working in. This work is also really guided by the active participation of our family and youth. It is a central core feature of what we're doing, and we're really using the systems of care values in our work and really organizing and having our families and youth lead this effort. So ISF is much like what you've learned about MTSS in that it is a structure and a process to bring education and our mental health systems together so they're interacting in a much more effective and efficient way. It's guided by our key stakeholders positioning our students and our families right there at the center and making them core leaders of this work. But it's really also guided by other important key stakeholders. And those people that really have the authority to reallocate resources, to change role and function, to change policy, to make some really critical decisions about the contingencies that shape adult behaviors, and really doing a deep dive into the organizational structures and breaking down barriers so that the districts are put in a position where they're actively supporting and nurturing our schools to do this work. So some of the benefits, it's very exciting that we just finished our first randomized control trial with the Interconnected Systems Framework. And one of the things that we're learning from that first set of studies is that when schools are deliberately infusing and embedding this work, we're actually able to uncover students with mental health needs much earlier on. We are able to better link our students and families with very specific and clear evidence-based interventions that match their needs. So we're really customizing the fit based on what our students need. We are having our schools and our districts really invest in a data tracking system that are making sure that we are rigorously progress monitoring the students that are receiving additional support, and that we're holding ourselves very close to fidelity. So we want to make sure that our adults are examining the extent to which we're implementing with high quality before we assign blame to the children and the youth for not showing success. So we hold those two pieces of data very close together as we're approaching this work. Another really core benefit of ISF is that we're expanding the role for our clinicians to support the adults as well as the students, and we're doing this across all tiers of support. So our clinicians are having flexibility and funding so that we're being able to more readily position them to be consultants at Tier 1 and help us coordinate what the prevention and promotion activities will be in the school and at the district. We're asking them to invest their time in Tier 2 systems team and help the team coalesce around what we can be doing to design evidence-based practices for groups of students who need a higher dose of support. And of course, we're investing in having them help build out the capacity for more staff to become social-emotional ambassadors, and we're positioning them around the Tier 3 where they are delivering direct services to those kids and youth and families that need intensive intervention. So everybody on this call is fully aware of kind of the magnitude of the problem with respect to some of the prevalence and incidence rates for mental health. And certainly I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on that piece, but I really just wanted to draw our attention to some of those major impacts. We know that 50% of all lifetime cases of mental illness begin by age 14 and 75% begin by age 24. We also know that the average delay between the onset of symptoms and intervention is 8 to 10 years. We've got 37% of our students with a mental health condition age 14 or older drop out of school, and that's the highest dropout rate of any disability group. And then finally, 70% of youth in state and local juvenile justice systems are having mental illness. And so we're literally putting children and youth in juvenile justice systems for having a mental health condition because we're not able to serve our students and youth, and the delays that they are experiencing are causing more time for suffering, unfortunately, and more crisis events, and we just don't have the systems there that are supporting them. So they're ending up making huge critical errors to the point of needing to be in juvenile justice settings. The other thing I want to call your attention to is CDC just published a report, literally just came off the website, some information with respect to suicide rates. For teens between the age of 15 and 19, suicide rates have increased by 76% between the years of 2007 and 2017. And the suicide rate for 10 to 14-year-olds has nearly tripled over the same time period. And so that was a report that was just released in October this month by the United States Centers for Disease Control, and we're certainly willing to share that report with you. But it's just this significant call to action because the magnitude of the problem warrants a complete change in how we're setting up our systems to be able to really meet the needs for all. So I want to begin knowing that we've kind of set the stage. There is a public health crisis. We're all very much aware of that. But I want to set the stage for something that I think is really important. And I really lean heavily on the prevention science literature here and the work of Tony Biglin and his colleagues in Oregon. And so I just want to read you this quote. You know, the Scientific Foundation in Prevention Science and Institute of Medicine has been created for the nation to begin to create a society in which young people arrive at adulthood with the skills, interests, assets, and health habits needed to live healthy, happy, and productive lives and with caring relationships with others. And I really want us to think about having this notion of equal priority in our educational settings for academic achievement and for healthy, happy, and productive youth that graduate ready to kind of handle the stress that life often brings us. And so I really rely on this notion of cultivating environments for our youth, be more nurturing. And what if we did that? What if we made our schools places where they were loving, caring, positive, nurturing places? The science is pretty clear in the resilience literature, and if you're looking at brain research, that we can prevent almost every problem we face if we build these communities that are positive, nurturing, and caring. So school mental health, PBIS, system of care, and implementation science are all kind of the core foundation of the ISF approach. It really builds on the success of those various social service platforms, but what we offer is really clear and specific steps on the process of integration and alignment. And so when we bring our district community leaders together, we spend a lot of time mapping out and currently assessing what's going on and really building on the strengths of that community. But it will also require folks who have decision-making authority to abandon the long-held patterns of doing business. It's really hard for us to stop doing things that aren't working and to invest in a small number of things that yield a really big impact with the children and youth and families that we serve. So this is really about creating a new model that's based on strengths of the schools, of the districts, and of the community, and really understanding and unpacking the specific data sources to uncover the needs of our students and families, but doing it in using the public health approach. So for those of you who are on the call, may have experienced PBIS or MTSS or have heard these acronyms being discussed in different meetings. And I just want to make sure we're all really grounded in what that really means. And so I offer this definition of PBIS or MTSS. I kind of use them interchangeably, although MTSS is the larger umbrella to bring multiple disciplines into that space. PBIS also functions using the same core features. It is unique to anything we've ever done in education, and it is the most scaled up initiative in all of the human services industries, and it's really a continuous improvement implementation framework. And so this is what it means. It means we bring a team that represents our stakeholders together, and together we organize our resources. And we do that through activity-based opportunities in our team. We do multi-tier gapping, we do gap analysis, we do working smarter activities, and we really just get a really good understanding of what we have in place, what's working, and what's not. So we organize our resources. We make sure that we've got data that allows us to make sure kids get help early. Right? We want to make sure everything is data-based, and we want that team to take more of a surveillance mindset, and although I hate using that term, I'm trying really hard to find out or figure out a better term for that. But really, how do we uncover the needs of our kids and our families prior to them showing up inside our school environment, right? How do we use the data that the community demographic data and other community data that's available to us, and how do we reposition and program so that kids are less likely to have an opportunity to fail? So we really want to make sure that we're uncovering our kids' needs through data. And that oftentimes involves a universal screener. We do stuff that's likely to work, right? We're going to really make sure that we're holding true to evidence-based interventions. And we want people that understand the peer-reviewed literature and research out there that will help us be better consumers of that evidence base. But just because it has evidence doesn't necessarily mean we need it. And too often, we see school systems try to take on way too much. So we need routines that shape our behavior to select evidence-based interventions, but they're critical to matching what our kids need. We provide supports for staff to do it right. Too often, our staff don't have the necessary skills to deal with the complex issues that we're asking them to deal with right now inside our community. So we really want to pull together a system where we are holding ourselves to fidelity, but we are also in a system that allows us time and space and support to get access to that skill and to continuously get access to coaching and performance feedback and letting the data guide how we reposition and reallocate our professional development. So it's with this framework that we launch into bringing our community partners together to coalesce around these big core messages. We do this in part, as I mentioned, we are the most scaled up initiative in all of the human services industries. But right now, PBIS is in about 30% of our schools across the country. And we have a series of randomized control trials that let us know when schools do this with high fidelity, the schools tell us they see improved academic achievement. We see reduced student discipline referrals and suspensions. In fact, if you're in a school that's implementing even Tier 1 PBIS, we know that you're 34% less likely to receive an office referral. We also see improved social emotional functioning inside our schools that are implementing this well. So there's that evidence of impact, which is why we launched from this framework. And the foundation is really clear, right? We have the science and the research to back up why we should invest in this. But many schools are still struggling to implement those advanced tiers, and those tiers 2 and tiers 3. Schools just simply don't have the resources to kind of figure out how to deal with the sheer magnitude of students that need so many more supports than we're able to provide. So we're seeing schools really struggle there. We're also seeing youth with internalizing issues going undetected. So we're relying on data like office referral information or instructional time, attendance, even benchmarks and academic data, but sometimes we miss kids with internalizing needs. So ISF is really about making sure that we're uncovering those kids' needs as well, and we'll go into some of that in a couple of minutes. We also know that this cannot just simply fall on the shoulders of a few. We don't have enough staff or resources to match the sheer magnitude. And while yes, absolutely we need more people that have clinical expertise and to deal with some of these issues in our schools, this is really about repositioning all of our staff in a very smart way so that we are building out the capacity for all of our staff to become mental health ambassadors. We also know that within the PBIS community, we oftentimes struggle to address the broader community data piece because we don't have those folks that are in the community offering up all of those data sources. And so we're not really taking full advantage of the wealth of data that's out there because we haven't really expanded our team out in the community, or we've got a lot of schools that are really shy about including the families on our team. So we know that while PBIS holds that foundation piece, there is much more that we need to do in terms of that expansion effort. We also draw very heavily on school mental health, and school mental health has a decade-long national movement, and I'm sure many of you are aware of the impact that school mental health has had for our children and how important it is that our schools really hold the promise of being the behavioral health prevention environment. And so We really want to make schools successful and bring our community partners into that setting. And because we know that's usually where they spend most of their time and where we're going to be able to serve them the best. All right, so deep breath. That was kind of a big setup and context, and hopefully you have a little bit of a sense of how we're connecting this to the implementation science, and we're connecting this to an expansion effort from what we know works really well for PBIS and school mental health. And there is so much to unpack. I want to make sure that as you're thinking about this for your own system, that we really hold true to the stages of implementation, right? We want to make sure that this is doable, feasible, and realistic, and that nobody feels like kind of forced into this. So we really take our time in making sure that when we get the right team at the table, we're going to move them through the stages of implementation so that we don't overwhelm the system. Because the moment we do that, then we kind of have to start over, and it makes the work really hard because we are really talking about systems change and really a complete overhaul. So in the beginning and in this stage, it's really important for folks to coalesce and have a common understanding about what the it is. And we spend a lot of time drilling down. We do a lot of learning walks to show folks what this looks like and sounds like, and we really pull from our knowledge development site about describing and sharing stories about what it looks like in the field. It's also at this point in exploration and adoption about those resource mapping activities that I described, and really get a sense of what we're doing currently that's addressing the needs and what we need to be doing differently. In installation, it's about really starting to repurpose some of the resources, the reallocation of resources, reallocation of staffing, really looking at the professional development and the training, really looking at some of the data that we're using or maybe not using to the full extent. And so that's really where we start to reposition the system, and we identify a small cohort of schools to work with. In initial implementation, this is really a fragile and awkward stage where we're starting the work, but we're only dipping our toes into a few places that are local within our community, and we're really learning about what we need to do at the district and community level to reposition our resources so that we're making sure that our schools are getting nurtured and cared for. The last thing we want to do is have schools think that they have to do this alignment thing on their own. So it's really important for us to make sure that we do a lot of fishbowling, a lot of learning walks, and making sure that at this stage we're really building the capacity for more people internal to the system to understand the coaching aspect of this work. And then finally, in full implementation, this is where we have a pretty good sized number of schools within that community really doing ISF with fidelity. And so we've got practitioners that are local to those sites, really implementing with proficiency, and now the external technical assistance providers are kind of stepping out of the picture a little bit and stating their intensive support quite a bit in full implementation. So we really want to honor the implementation science aspect of this and make sure that this is doable and feasible for the folks in that community. So a little deeper dive into ISF. We function around really 4 critical key messages. ISF is about installing one comprehensive system of delivery. We want our districts and our schools to invest in one set of teams. Oftentimes when we go in and first do resource mapping with our school systems, they will list about 20 teams that they're currently invested in. We might have a wellness team, a climate team, a discipline team, an academic team, and they're all really doing a great job of maybe using some aspects of a multi-tiered system of support, but they're doing it in silos. And so one of the first things that we will ask folks to invest in is a single set of teams, one set of social, emotional, and behavioral teams. That's a big key message. Number 2, access is not enough. So we define success by getting positive outcomes for our children and youth and their families. Too often, we don't see rigorous progress monitoring activities or fidelity checks or tracking outcomes for kids that are experiencing mental health support. And so we want to make sure that when we're counting the number of kids who might be getting access to services, that we get a little bit more refined about what that looks like and sounds like. So we're moving away from using really generic terms like services and counseling to moving towards talking really clearly and specifically about what evidence-based practices is that student receiving, whether it be in a group or an individual setting. What was that evidence-based skill that they're working on, and how do we build a system where they're learning about that skill maybe inside that session, but we've got a system where there are a lot of key adults who are helping have that youth use those skills in different settings, in different locations across their day. And so we really are very serious about we are successful when kids get positive outcomes as a result of the supports that we're providing. Number 3 critical message, mental health is for all, and we really want to build out the capacity for our adults to feel like they've got the skills and competencies to be mental health ambassadors, but we all need specific skills necessary to navigate our life. And so we spend a lot of time talking about caregiver wellness and staff wellness and really nurturing and providing support to our adults who are doing so much each and every day on the front lines to really support our children. And so our big key message is that mental health and having a plan for wellness and making sure we're taking care of ourselves is absolutely essential and critical. And finally, key feature number 4 is about really holding true to the core features of a multi-tiered system of support. We think it's absolutely essential, and the data is being really clear in our research projects that those core features are essential to installing a school mental health approach. So those are the 4 key messages. We take a little bit of a deeper dive into what this ISF thing is. I promise I'm going to give a pause in a minute and let folks enter questions that they might have in the chat. We can certainly hit the pause button in a couple of slides here. I realize that this webinar is fairly dense, so the recording and going back and maybe listening to the recording will be helpful, and the brief will also, the fact sheet will also be really helpful in kind of building your fluency as we describe what this is. So as we think about those core features of MTSS, and as we're applying that knowledge across all of the social, emotional, and behavioral interventions, we want to make sure, again, that we've got effective teams, right? So what if we had teams that had school leaders and community mental health providers on teams that made decisions together about what the needs were? They looked at the data together and they made decisions together about what they were going to do by way of prevention, how they were going to fortify their Tier 1 support. So effective teams are absolutely essential. What if we were to not only look at data that we already collect naturally in the school environment, but what if we looked at visits to the school nurse and visits to the school counselor, and we looked at those to uncover kids who may have internalizing needs? What if we looked at the community demographic data that would give us much more of an accurate picture of things that our communities are really going through that are impacting student emotions and behaviors in the school day? And so having that expanded team allows us to bring an extra data set so that we get a really good, accurate picture that reflects what our community is really dealing with. And along with that, we would look at protective factors, right? We would look at the strengths of the community to build on the platform of things that are happening in our community. And another MTSS feature is that, again, we're going to be really rigorous in the selection and implementation of evidence-based practices. We're going to give ourselves permission to stop doing things that aren't making an impact and focus on a few things that match the needs. We're really talking about that early access. We really want to put comprehensive screeners in. You know, what if, in our utopian world, right, what if we were to screen every single student in our community just like we do vision screening and hearing screening? What if that was just the norm, where we, in the first quarter of every school year, we were able to uncover kids with internalizing needs and kids with externalizing needs who maybe would have never been on our radar until something had happened? I've mentioned this throughout so far in the slides that we are really talking about rigorous progress monitoring for both fidelity and effectiveness, no matter who delivers the intervention. And then finally, coaching support. And so how do we have cross-training activities and cross-coaching opportunities where our community employed providers are sitting in teams with us, they're embedded, fully embedded in our school community, and we've got access to common training events and common coaching support that really build up the capacity for all kind of adhering to these core features. So I've already mentioned kind of the symmetry of process, right? This notion that the things that we ask our district and community leadership team to invest in and look at are going to be very similar to what we ask our state to do and very similar to what we might ask our county system if that's part of our infrastructure to do. So you see the cascade of implementation represented here, and it's really about making sure that collectively we're all using a common way of work, right? We're all adhering to the core features, but that there's a symmetry of process. If you look right here in the middle at the district leadership team, this is really the point where we go in. So before we do any training at the school level, we're going to work really hard with the district leadership team to make sure that they have a very clear understanding of how this is different and how much support schools are going to need in this work. We're also going to bring our community partners together at this team and really coalesce around some of the immediate needs of the system and address those first and foremost. And so this whole cascade of implementation is really going to cut through all of these different systems, and we're all going to be kind of adhering to that common approach, that common way of work. So I'm going to just hit the pause button really quickly here and see if we've got folks in the chat that might have questions. And I'll actually turn it over to Leora or Kelcey.
Well, Susan, most of our questions are actually going to be addressed in your upcoming next session. So maybe, especially just in light of time, after you get some water, we can walk through, because I think a lot of folks have questions about resource mapping and district and community leadership teams. Sure. So let's move forward.
We'll keep charging on. Okay, so why focus on the district community leadership team? So again, there are some necessary organizational changes that have to be developed. So for instance, one of the biggest perceived barriers of really redesigning and bringing our clinicians onto teams is because most of them are funded through direct service, right? And so it's really up to those key folks that can blend funding, that can use gen ed funds, that can use special education dollars, and that can use Medi-Cal dollars and bring them into one set of funding so that we can not only possibly hire more personnel, but we can really reallocate how we're utilizing them. So it's really about having that district team focus on some of those necessary organizational changes, and oftentimes it starts with funding and developing a memorandum of understanding and service agreements about how we're going to utilize our staff differently. If we focus on the building level without the district level, there really will be some serious kind of barriers, not only around funding, but sometimes around policy, sometimes around issues related to confidentiality, and it really makes it slow the momentum down significantly. So we always want to start at the district and community team. This team has several different functions, right? So we need to have people in positions who do some of those changes in funding and changes in policy, but we also need a group of people who are charged and have adequate time in their schedule to perform the implementation functions, right? We need our professional development time, we need training and coaching and data systems, but we need to actively be engaging our schools and training and delivering support to actively. And so there are two really big critical functions in this leadership team, right? Those executive functions and implementation functions. And we've really scripted this out in some of our new installation guides that I'll identify here in a second. And so when we're building kind of this utopian version of ourselves out, one of the big critical questions here, and I mentioned this before, is what if we really had school employed and community employed staff use both of those sets of data, right? They really got a good, clear picture, and together as an integrated team, they selected evidence-based practices. This really means moving away from a co-located model to a fully integrated model. We do not want our clinicians to be kind of sitting in an office space by themselves. We want them fully embedded into the school environment and be part of the community. Just to get a little bit more explicit about what some of our district community leadership teams are examining, I wanted to offer some of the data sources that our communities are currently looking at. And so on the left-hand column, you'll see some of the data sources that our educational systems usually collect, things like climate surveys, right? Youth risk assessment surveys. They're looking at academic health. They're looking at social behavior health, and they're looking at attendance data. Now notice on the left-hand column some of the community data. So when we bring our partners to the table, they're teaching us what some of the specific information is related to census data, related to some of the community assets that we might not be aware of, and wellness. Looking at some of the health indicators and behavior risk factors and surveillance data that's being gathered and accumulated in the community. I want you to look at the right-hand side too. Notice that we are getting some general trends and key findings. So you'll see very aggregate information being collected. So as this team went through a discovery process and they did a resource mapping and they looked at some of their data, these were the specific trend data that they wanted to call our attention to. And so they knew more specifically from a climate perspective, 60% of their students felt like they belonged to the school community. 80% of their staff felt like they belonged to the school community. And 60% felt like they were safe at school. And so you can see this aggregate data really help them kind of reposition and make decisions around fortifying Tier 1 before starting to add more evidence-based practices for kids that needed more supports, because when they had these kinds of numbers, there was no way they were going to be able to individualize supports for all the kids that needed. So they really needed to first and foremost focus on really establishing a core Tier 1 foundation. So in the process of installation, we're making sure that the roles and functions are clearly defined. As again, we're asking people to do things differently. And we want to be really clear. We want to make sure that we're not invading each other's spaces and really honoring each other's work. So having really honest and transparent dialogue is really important. Blending and having the opportunity for those decision-making folks to understand how we can blend fiscal allocations really enable our providers to serve on the teams across the tiers. And then having the right kind of professional development that matches our adult needs and providing those coaching supports and making sure that we're actively engaging our community partners and bringing them and having them collectively understand how the education system operates. So we have these very clear and specific working agreements. Now, sometimes this can take 6 months, right? So we're talking about when we bring that team together to really commit to a long-term journey throughout the process. So a little bit more relying on at the exploration phase, we have scripted out the specific steps that a district community leadership team would go through, and we would position a technical assistance provider within that system to take that team through this process. And so we want to establish an exploration team, right? We want to get the right people on the page. We want to talk about the current partnerships and examine that. We want to assess the impact of current things that we're doing. We want to develop out that shared understanding of ISF. We want to make sure that we're going to determine the benefit, like as a result of what we're going to do, what will the outcomes be? How will this benefit? What's the compelling why about what data point are we going to rally around? And then the exploration team will decide whether or not this is a good time to adopt. Sometimes it's not the right time. Sometimes the system is just too overwhelmed to have time and space to do this work. And so as a technical assistance provider, we would walk the team through asking really critical questions and walking them through really critical processes that would allow these transparent and honest conversations to have where we could really be vulnerable and talk really explicitly about things that are missing in our work. And so this is an example of a team that took the time and did resource mapping. And again, this was over several different meetings. And we identified the different initiatives that were all under the umbrella of social, emotional, and behavioral support. So you see some of the teams related to those initiatives. You'll see that we asked them about describing their mission. We asked them questions around the personnel that are involved in the implementation. We asked them questions around expected outcomes. right? And we just really slowly unpack what it is that they're working on. And then you'll notice that there are some items that are flagged in red. And this just kind of alerts us that there might be some overlap, in which case we might ask teams to merge. It might be that they're not tracking specific data sets. And so we want to kind of go back and build an action plan around ensuring that we are working as efficiently and effectively as we possibly can. So that's an example. So really think about your local context right now. There are many of you who are doing a ton of work right now, maybe around MTSS or PBIS and school mental health. To what extent are you tracking fidelity of implementation? To what extent do you have data tracking systems that are allowing us to look at outcomes for kids? You know, one of the first things that we will ask a team to do in this process is examine existing partnerships and kind of looking at the MOUs and ask ourselves, to what extent are we really co-located or are we fully embedded? And some of the MOUs and the ways that they're set up sometimes create those co-located systems. And then again, thinking about your leadership structures, what teams already exist. We don't necessarily need you to create a new team. You might already have a district leadership team that's invested in this work. And so how do you collectively build up that team to make sure it's representative of stakeholders and you're adhering to those core features of MTSS? So I know that was a lot to unpack in a very small amount of time. And again, this is a series of events, so we will do some more review in the beginning of our next series. But I just want to highlight some of the resources that you might be wondering about in between these webinars. So one is that we've just launched our new PBIS.org website, and we have a section on mental health and social emotional well-being. And so you'll be able to look at some of the examples I've described today, materials, presentations, other webinars. So that might be a good place to look for resources. We also have some reading material. In 2013, we published our first monograph, Advancing Education Effectiveness. And so if you're working at the district level, we've got chapters that are dedicated to district level implementation. If you're working at the school level, we've got chapters dedicated to that. And we've got some nice stories in the appendices from our knowledge development site. That could be something, if you wanted to create common knowledge with a larger group of people in your system, you could start a reading group and really connect with that work there. We also have just launched our second monograph, and so right now, because we just created a new national website, it is now being housed at Midwest PBIS Network, and so our volume 2 is really much more a how-to, and it's broken down in 6 chapters, and you'll be able to look at narrative and chapters, but you'll also be able to review some installation guides and other resources for getting started. So those are just some of the resources, and here's an example of a district installation guide that offers up very clear and concise activities that we take our teams through as we build up an action plan that's really guided specifically to the needs of the communities that we're serving. So that's an example of the district community installation guide. And this is the example of the school installation guide. And in future webinars, we are going to take a deeper dive into those 2 resources to give you a much better picture of what this looks like and sounds like. So with that, I will turn it over to Leora. Right? That was a lot. That was a lot.
Yes, now you get to exhale. Yes, so I'm actually going to move us into closing for time purposes. So before we move into closing, I really want to invite folks in the chat box to list or name one takeaway. Like, what is, if you were to tell anyone, family, friends, someone on the street, your coffee person, what's one thing that you took away from this learning session? What is that? So Cammie is taking away that you're incredible, Susan.
Thank you, Cammie. I love you.
Yeah. Yes. We'll actually be hearing from Cammie's team as a practitioner focus in the next 2 sessions. We've got some implementation, science, and practice call out, the complication of it, the humanity of it. Susan, I think what was really important is bringing up the power of coaching and the necessity of coaching. We've also got mental health and SEL should be implemented in a similar model as MTSS, that they are in fact part of the embedded framework, not separate, but embedded. Resource mapping is necessary, but also understanding if the effectiveness of resources are necessary. Oh, mind-blowing. Stuart had a mind-blowing connection between building community and school resources together. Beautiful, beautiful.
Nice.
So
nice.
as folks are starting to put in their takeaways, I want to offer a couple pieces. So one is that we will be sending all of the resources that our colleague Kelcey and all of you put into the chat box as Susan was presenting. So I want folks to feel good about that those will either come in our newsletter and will also be lifted up in our second webinars. The other piece is that, as Susan mentioned, this is the start of an ongoing conversation. So the next two sessions, the second is in December and the third is in January, will really do that, what's different from where we've come from and where we're going, primarily in the implementation. And I want to lift up that the next two sessions, we're so excited, we'll have a practitioner highlighted, spotlit, from both the Northwest region and the Pacific South region, because we think it's really important that you all hear from each other about how you've been leading this work and where the starts and where the stopgaps have led us. And then we'll be in January really thinking about what it looks like to install the integration, which is really difficult and complex, but also incredibly resourced with Susan's team and with all of you. I want to again invite you to 201, 301. You do not have to have been on this 101 to have been on the 201 and 301. So if you have colleagues who weren't here, definitely invite them. We're going to be doing a little bit of foundation and grounding in both. And I also wanted to lift up that Kelcey and I, part of the Northwest and Pacific Southwest, we are thinking about starting a ISF community of practice to really do that more in-depth coaching and resourcing. So I just want to have you stay tuned for that as we move forward. And I'm going to go quickly through a couple pieces and then we'll close. So the other announcement is that if you are in the Pacific Southwest region, we're hosting our no-cost Winter Learning Institute January 14th through 16th in Long Beach, California. So we'll be doing one day on mental health, one day on school mental health, and then the third day on school mental health. You've got the link in the deck to see the sessions that we're offering with really lovely faculty, so we're incredibly excited about that. You also have the ability to sign up for our newsletter and also the Northwest MHTTC's newsletter, which is a really great way to hear about upcoming webinars, upcoming issue briefs, and also let us know if you have questions or you'd like to reach out to Susan for direct TA. What are ways that you can engage in this conversation as we move forward? I'm also going to take a breath. We are going to close so that you have time to fill out an evaluation. And I just want to reiterate that we do get funded by SAMHSA, and our funding is really contingent on the evaluation. It takes about 4 to 5 minutes. So I really hope that you put in what was helpful. We'll also be looking through that in order to ensure that numbers 201 and 301 meet your needs. I know this was really fast. So without further ado, thank you. The incredible participants, the folks on the line who are asking really wonderful questions and resourcing each other. And a big thank you to Susan for a kind of whirlwind but incredibly thorough and intentional introduction to this framework that really can be and has proven to be instrumental in making sure our schools really live up to the promise to be platforms for student and school employee healing and wellness. So thank you to Susan, thank you to all of you, and we are going to close. And you will get the evaluation, and we'll see you at the 201. Thank you so much, everyone.